10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 65. The Lottery. By 8 o'clock in the evening, every one had assembled in the queen mother's apartments. Anne of Austria, in full dress, beautiful still from former loveliness and from all the resources coquetry can command at the hands of clever assistants, concealed, or rather pretended to conceal, from the crowd of courtiers who surrounded her, and who still admired her, thanks to the combination of circumstances which we have indicated in the preceding chapter, the ravages, which were already visible, of the acute suffering to which she finally yielded a few years later. Madame, almost as great a coquette as Anne of Austria, and the queen, simple and natural as usual, were seated beside her, each contending for her good graces. The ladies of honor, united in a body, in order to resist with greater effect, and consequently with more success, the witty and lively conversations which the young men held about them, were enabled, like a battalion formed in a square, to offer each other the means of attack and defence which were thus at their command. Montalais, learned in that species of warfare which consists of sustained skirmishing, protected the whole line by a sort of rolling fire she directed against the enemy. Saint Aignan, in utter despair at the rigor, which became almost insulting from the very fact of her persisting in it, Mademoiselle de Tonnay Charente displayed, tried to turn his back upon her, but, overcome by the irresistible brilliancy of her eyes, he, every moment, returned to consecrate his defeat by new submissions, to which Mademoiselle de Tonnay Charente did not fail to reply by fresh acts of impertinence. Saint Aignan did not know which way to turn. La Valliere had about her, not exactly a court, but sprinklings of courtiers. Saint Aignan, hoping by this maneuver to attract Athénias's attention towards him, approached the young girl, and saluted her with a respect that induced some to believe that he wished to balance Athénias by Louise. But these were persons who had neither been witnesses of the scene during the shower, nor had heard it spoken of. As the majority was already informed, and well informed too, on the matter, the acknowledged favor with which she was regarded had attracted to her side some of the most astute, as well as the least sensible members of the court. The former, because they said with Montaigne, "How do I know?" and the latter, who said with Rabelais, "Perhaps." The greatest number had followed in the wake of the latter, just as in hunting 5 or 6 of the best hounds alone follow the scent of the animal hunted, while the remainder of the pack follow only the scent of the hounds. The two queens and Madame examined with particular attention the toilettes of their ladies and maids of honor, and they condescended to forget they were queens in recollecting that they were women. In other words, they piteously picked to pieces every person present who wore a petticoat. The looks of both princesses simultaneously fell upon La Valliere, who, as we have just said, was completely surrounded at the moment. Madame knew not what pity was, and said to the queen mother, as she turned towards her, if fortune were just, she would favor that poor La Valliere. "That is not possible," said the queen mother, smiling. "Why not?" "There are only 200 tickets, so that it was not possible to inscribe every one's name on the list." "And hers is not there, then?" "No." "What a pity! She might have won them, and then sold them." "Sold them!" exclaimed the queen. "Yes, it would have been a dowry for her, and she would not have been obliged to marry without her trousseau, as will probably be the case." "Really!" answered the queen mother. "Poor little thing! Has she no dresses, then?" And she pronounced these words like a woman who has never been able to understand the inconvenience of a slenderly filled purse. "Stay, look at her! Heaven forgive me if she is not wearing the very same petticoat this evening that she had on this morning during the promenade, and which she managed to keep clean, thanks to the care the king took of her in sheltering her from the rain." At the very moment Madame uttered these words, the king entered the room. The two queens would not perhaps have observed his arrival, so completely were they occupied in their ill-natured remarks, had not Madame noticed that, all at once, La Valliere, who was standing up facing the gallery, exhibited certain signs of confusion, and then said a few words to the courtiers who surrounded her, who immediately dispersed. This movement induced Madame to look towards the door, and at that moment the captain of the guards announced the king. At this moment La Valliere, who had hitherto kept her eyes fixed upon the gallery, suddenly cast them down as the king entered. His majesty was dressed magnificently, and in the most perfect taste. He was conversing with Monsieur and the Duc de Roquelaure, Monsieur on his right, and the Duc de Roder on his left. The king advanced, in the first place towards the queens, to whom he bowed with an air full of graceful respect. He took his mother's hand and kissed it, addressed a few compliments to Madame upon the beauty of her toilette, and then began to make the round of the assembly. La Valliere was saluted in the same manner as the others, but with neither more nor less attention. His majesty then returned to his mother and his wife. When the courtier noticed that the king had only addressed some ordinary remark to the young girl who had been so particularly noticed in the morning, they immediately drew their own conclusion to account for this coldness of manner. This conclusion being, that although the king may have taken a sudden fancy to her, that fancy had already disappeared. One thing, however, must be remarked, that close beside La Valliere, among the number of the courtiers, M. Fouquet was to be seen, and his respectfully attentive manner served to sustain the young girl in the midst of the varied emotions that visibly agitated her. M. Fouquet was just on the point, moreover, of speaking in a more friendly manner with Mademoiselle de la Valliere, when M. Colbert approached, and after having bowed to Fouquet with all the formality of respectful politeness, he seemed to take up a post beside La Valliere, for the purpose of entering into conversation with her. Fouquet immediately quitted his place. These proceedings were eagerly devoured by the eyes of Montalais and Malicorne, who mutually exchanged their observations on the subject. De Guiche, standing within the embrasure of one of the windows, saw no one but Madame. But as Madame, on her side, frequently glanced at La Valliere, De Guiche's eyes, following Madame's, were from time to time cast upon the young girl. La Valliere instinctively felt herself sinking beneath the weight of all these different looks, inspired, some by interest, others by envy. She had nothing to compensate her for her suffering, not a kind word from her companions, not a look of affection from the king. No one could possibly express the misery the poor girl was suffering. The queen mother next directed the small table to be brought forward, on which the lottery tickets were placed, 200 in number, and begged Madame de Motteville to read the list of the names. It was a matter of course that this list had been drawn out in strict accordance with the laws of etiquette. The king's name was first on the list, next the queen mother, then the queen, monsieur, madame, and so on. All hearts throbbed anxiously as the list was read out. More than 300 persons had been invited, and each of them was anxious to learn whether his or her name was to be found in the number of privileged names. The king listened with as much attention as the others, and when the last name had been pronounced, he noticed that La Valliere had been omitted from the list. Every one, of course, remarked this omission. The king flushed as if much annoyed, but La Valliere, gentle and resigned, as usual, exhibited nothing of the sort. While the list was being read, the king had not taken his eyes off the young girl, who seemed to expand, as it were, beneath the happy influence she felt was shed around her, and who was delighted, and too pure in spirit for any other thought than that of love to find an entrance either to her mind or her heart. Acknowledging this touching semi-denial by the fixity of his attention, the king showed La Valliere how much he appreciated its delicacy. When the list was finished, the different faces of those who had been omitted or forgotten fully expressed their disappointment. Malicorne was also left out from amongst the men, and the grimace he made plainly said to Montalais, who was also forgotten, "Can we not contrive to arrange matters with fortune in such a manner that she will not forget us?" To which a smile full of intelligence from Mademoiselle Aure replied, "Certainly we can." The tickets were distributed to each according to the number listed. The king received his first, next the queen mother, then monsieur, then the queen and madame, and so on. After this, Anne of Austria opened a small Spanish leather bag, containing 200 numbers engraved upon small balls of mother of pearl, and presented the open sack to the youngest of her maids of honor, for the purpose of taking one of the balls out of it. The eager expectation of the throng, amidst all the tediously slow preparations, was rather that of cupidity than curiosity. Saint Aignan bent towards Mademoiselle de Tonnay Charente to whisper to her, "Since we each have a number, let us unite our two chances. The bracelet shall be yours if I win, and if you are successful, deign to give me but one look of your beautiful eyes." "No," said Athenais, "if you win the bracelet, keep it. Every one for himself." "You are without any pity," said Saint Aignan, "and I will punish you by a quatrain. Beautiful Iris, to my vows you are too opposed." "Silence," said Athenais, "you will prevent me hearing the winning number." "Number 1," said the young girl who had drawn the mother of pearl from the Spanish leather bag. "The king!" exclaimed the queen mother. "The king has won!" repeated the queen, delightedly. "Oh, the king! Your dream!" said Madame, joyously, in the ear of Anne of Austria. The king was the only one who did not exhibit any satisfaction. He merely thanked fortune for what she had done for him, in addressing a slight salutation to the young girl who had been chosen as her proxy. Then receiving from the hands of Anne of Austria, amid the eager desire of the whole assembly, the casket enclosing the bracelets, he said, "Are these bracelets really beautiful, then?" "Look at them," said Anne of Austria, "and judge for yourself." The king looked at them, and said, Yes, indeed, an admirable medallion. What perfect finish!" Queen Maria Theresa easily saw, and that too at the very first glance, that the king would not offer the bracelets to her; but, as he did not seem the least degree in the world disposed to offer them to Madame, she felt almost satisfied, or nearly so. The king sat down. The most intimate among the courtiers approached, one by one, for the purpose of admiring more closely the beautiful piece of workmanship, which soon, with the king's permission, was handed about from person to person. Immediately every one, connoisseurs or not, uttered various exclamations of surprise, and overwhelmed the king with congratulations. There was, in fact, something for everybody to admire, the brilliance for some, and the cutting for others. The ladies present visibly displayed their impatience to see such a treasure monopolized by the gentlemen. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," said the king, whom nothing escaped, "one would almost think that you wore bracelets as the Sabines used to. Hand them round for a while for the inspection of the ladies, who seem to have, and with far greater right, an excuse for understanding such matters." These words appeared to Madame the commencement of a decision she expected. She gathered, besides, this happy belief from the glances of the queen mother. The courtier who held them at the moment the king made this remark, amidst the general agitation, hastened to place the bracelets in the hands of the queen, Maria Theresa, who, knowing too well, poor woman, that they were not designed for her, hardly looked at them, and almost immediately passed them on to Madame. The latter, and even more minutely Monsieur, gave the bracelets a long look of anxious and almost covetous desire. She then handed the jewels to those ladies who were near her, pronouncing this single word, but with an accent which was worth a long phrase: "Magnificent!" The ladies who had received the bracelets from Madame's hands looked at them as long as they chose to examine them, and then made them circulate by passing them onwards towards the right. During this time the king was tranquilly conversing with De Guiche and Fouquet, rather passively letting them talk, than himself listening. Accustomed to the set form of ordinary phrases, his ear, like that of all men who exercise an incontestable superiority over others, merely selected from the conversations held in various directions the indispensable word which requires reply. His attention, however, was now elsewhere, for it wandered as his eyes did. Mademoiselle de Tonnay Charente was the last of the ladies inscribed for the tickets, and, as if she had ranked according to her name upon the list, she had only Montalais and La Valliere near her. When the bracelets reached these latter two, no one appeared to take any further notice of them. The humble hands which for a moment touched these jewels, deprived them, for a time, of their importance, a circumstance which did not, however, prevent Montalais from starting with joy, envy, and covetous desire at the sight of the beautiful stones still more than at their magnificent workmanship. It is evident that if she were compelled to decide between the pecuniary value and the artistic beauty, Montalais would unhesitatingly have preferred diamonds to cameos, and her disinclination, therefore, to pass them on to her companion, La Valliere, was very great. La Valliere fixed a look almost of indifference upon the jewels. "Oh, how beautiful, how magnificent these bracelets are!" exclaimed Montalais. "And yet you do not go in ecstasies about them, Louise? You are no true woman, I am sure." "Yes, I am, indeed," replied the young girl, with an accent of the most charming melancholy; "but why desire that which can never, by any possibility, be ours?" The king, his head bent forward, was listening to what Louise was saying. Hardly had the vibration of her voice reached his ear, than he rose, radiant with delight, and passing across the whole assembly, from the place where he stood to La Valliere: "You are mistaken, mademoiselle," he said. "You are a woman, and every woman has a right to wear jewels, which are a woman's appurtenance." "Oh, sire," said La Valliere, "your majesty will not absolutely believe in my modesty?" "I believe you possess every virtue, mademoiselle, frankness as well as every other. I entreat you, therefore, to say frankly what you think of these bracelets." "That they are beautiful, sire, and cannot be offered to any other than a queen." "I am delighted that such is your opinion, mademoiselle. The bracelets are yours, and the king begs your acceptance of them." And as, with a movement almost resembling terror, La Valliere eagerly held out the casket to the king gently pushed back her trembling hand. A silence of astonishment, more profound than that of death, reigned in the assembly. And yet, from the side where the queens were, no one had heard what he had said, nor understood what he had done. A charitable friend, however, took upon herself to spread the news. It was Tonnay Charente, to whom Madame made a sign to approach. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Tonnay Charente, "how happy that Valliere is! The king has just given her the bracelets." Madame bit her lips to such a degree that the blood appeared upon the surface of the skin. The young queen looked first at La Valliere and then at Madame, and began to laugh. Anne of Austria rested her chin upon her beautiful white hand, and remained for a long time absorbed by a presentiment that disturbed her mind, and by a terrible pang which stung her heart. De Guiche, observing Madame turn pale, and guessing the cause of her changing color, abruptly quitted the assembly and disappeared. Malicorne was then able to approach Montalais very quietly, and under cover of the general din of conversation said to her, "Auray, your fortune and our fortune are standing at your elbow." "Yes," was her reply, as she tenderly embraced La Valliere, whom, inwardly, she was tempted to strangle. Chapter 65. End of 10 Years Later, by Alexandre Dumas.